All right, buckle up, because today we're diving into a name you've probably seen making headlines. Alisher Usmanov.
Yeah, he's been in the news a lot lately.
And while those headlines might scream, oligarch and not much else, we're going beyond the buzzwords today. Trying to uncover the man behind the money, the story beyond the headlines.
It's easy to get caught up in those simplified narratives, for sure.
Right. So today, we're ditching the sensationalism and digging into some substance. We're using his Wikipedia entry as our guide, which
His Wikipedia page is fascinating.
I know. Right. And before you say anything, I know you're thinking Wikipedia, really.
Yeah, I just said.
But this isn't some, late-night internet rabbit hole. This entry is seriously, meticulously researched, full of citations, and more twists and turns than, a spy thriller.
It really is a fascinating journey. It kind of mirrors that whole tumultuous transition of the former Soviet Republic.
It does. Okay, so get this. Born in Soviet Uzbekistan, sets his sights on diplomacy, studies international law. Sounds like a pretty clear path, right?
Yeah, pretty standard.
And then, bam, prison.
Yeah. 1980. Charges of fraud and embezzlement. Slapped with a 6-year sentence in a Soviet prison. How do you go from those beginnings to, say, owning part of Arsenal Football Club? Not exactly your typical career trajectory.
It's a wild ride. And
Yeah.
what's even more interesting is that his conviction was later overturned by the Uzbek Supreme Court.
Oh, yeah?
They ruled that the case was fabricated.
Oh, wow.
But even though it was overturned, it hasn't really stopped all the controversy surrounding that whole period of his life.
It's kind of crazy how these things follow you, huh? So you've got these early years, shrouded in legal battles, accusations, and then boom, Usmanov explodes onto the business scene. And we're not talking some modest little venture here. We're talking about a full-fledged empire.
Yeah.
Mining, tech, media, you name it. Usmanov's got his hands in it. He even had a stake in an esports team.
Esports, yeah?
It seems almost random, but is it?
Well, not really. This is where understanding the whole post-Soviet landscape becomes, absolutely crucial. You have to remember that power vacuum that was left in the wake of the Soviet Union collapsing.
Right.
Yeah, it was like the Wild West over there for a while.
Totally. And all these state assets were just ripe for the taking. And individuals like Usmanov were in a really good position to capitalize on all that chaos. I mean, we're talking about acquiring companies left and right, forming all these strategic partnerships with people like tech investor Yuri Milner. I mean...
These are just business deals. These are power plays, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Calculated moves in a very high-stakes game.
Wow. It's amazing how interconnected everything is. It's like you start tracing these threads.
Yeah.
And you find yourself going down all these rabbit holes, each one with its own, whole story.
Totally. And to really grasp the audacity of some of Usmanov's business ventures, you have to look at Udokan Copper. This wasn't just another acquisition. This was a whole statement. So picture this. One of the largest untapped copper deposits on the planet, buried deep in Siberia, untouched since 1949 because of how remote it is and the conditions there. It's just brutal. And Usmanov decides to take on this monumental challenge. What a gamble.
Talk about high risk, high reward.
Yeah, completely.
This Udokan Copper project, I don't know, it just gives you a sense of his ambition, his appetite for these ventures that most people wouldn't even touch. It's like he saw opportunity where everyone else just saw obstacles.
Absolutely. And that willingness to dive headfirst into the unknown, that is, I think, a hallmark of Usmanov's entire career. It's what's allowed him to not just survive, but to thrive in the post-Soviet business world.
And speaking of bold moves, we have to talk about Usmanov and professional soccer, specifically Arsenal Football Club.
It's a big part of his story.
Huge. You can't tell a story without it.
Oh, absolutely not. It wasn't just a business deal for him. It was deeply personal. Legacy, passion, maybe even a little ego in there.
And for anyone who follows soccer, especially the English Premier League, this was like a real-life drama unfolding. Usmanov versus Stan Kroenke, these two titans battling for control of this iconic club. He started acquiring shares back in 2007. And by 2011, he was Arsenal's second-largest shareholder, right on Kroenke's heels.
Yeah, and he wasn't content just to be a silent partner either.
Oh, no, he was very vocal.
Usmanov was very vocal about his vision for the club, even publicly criticizing the board for what he saw as a lack of ambition, especially once Kroenke had that majority control.
It got pretty heated, open letters, boardroom showdowns, a whole 9 yards. It was like something out of a movie.
Totally. But even with all of Usmanov's efforts, Kroenke ultimately tightened his grip on the club, and Usmanov eventually sold his stake in 2018.
I wonder what would happen if Usmanov had gotten control. Would they have been more successful? Or would his vision have backfired?
It's a good question.
It makes you think. Speaking of influence, you've got this incredibly complex figure. Former prisoner turned business magnate, passionate sports enthusiast, and then we add another layer, another wrinkle to the mix. Philanthropy.
It's an interesting contradiction, isn't it?
It is. On one hand, you have a man who's been sanctioned by multiple countries, and on the other, he's consistently ranked among the world's top philanthropists.
It's not every day you see that.
This is the guy who bought back a Nobel Prize medal just to give it back to the scientist who had to sell it. Who does that?
It's wild.
It speaks to the kind of wealth and influence he has.
And the scale of his giving is it's pretty incredible. Hundreds of millions, even billions, poured into art, education, COVID relief. I read that he once bought a massive collection of old Soviet cartoons just to donate them to a children's TV channel.
It's incredibly generous.
Yeah.
What motivates that kind of giving, though? Is it pure altruism? A desire to give back? Or is there a more strategic element at play here?
It's a good question. I mean, there's probably no single answer, right? It's probably a mix of things.
Probably.
But philanthropy can be a very powerful tool, especially for someone in Usmanov's position.
Right. It's this strange dance between genuine generosity and, very savvy image management. It's almost impossible to separate the two.
Yeah, very much so.
Speaking of image management, remember that whole Wikipedia incident?
Oh, yes. The Wikipedia controversy.
For those who don't know, it came out that Usmanov had hired a PR firm to, let's just say, tidy up his Wikipedia page a little bit.
A little bit.
Scrubbing details about his past legal troubles, just smoothing over some of the less flattering aspects of his career.
It didn't go over well.
No, it didn't. People were outraged. They accused him of trying to whitewash his past and control the narrative about his life. And it does make you wonder about the power of information, right?
Absolutely. Especially in the digital age.
And how figures like Usmanov try to shape public perception. But, beyond Wikipedia edits, Usmanov's involvement in the media goes way deeper. We mentioned he owns Kommersant, one of Russia's leading newspapers. And that ownership hasn't been without controversy either.
Not at all, no. There was that incident, I think it was back in 2011, right after the Russian parliamentary elections.
Yeah.
Kommersant ran an issue that was, let's just say, pretty critical of Putin and the election process. We're talking photos of defaced ballots, articles openly questioning the legitimacy of the election. Not exactly what you would call towing the party line.
No, not at all.
And the backlash was swift. Usmanov fired both the editor and the head of the publishing house,
Wow.
citing ethical breaches and petty hooliganism.
That's a power move if I've ever heard one. It makes you think about what journalists have to deal with, especially when they're reporting on powerful figures like Usmanov.
It's a tightrope walk.
It is. So we've got this incredibly complex web of business dealings, philanthropy, accusations, political maneuvering. It's a lot to unpack, and it begs the question, who is the real Alisher Usmanov?
That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? I mean, we've dug into his past, we've explored his business empire, uncovered these philanthropic endeavors, even waded into the murky waters of media control and political influence.
It's like trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces keep shifting.
Yeah.
Every time you think you've got a handle on Usmanov, another layer emerges.
Right.
But that's what makes these deep dives so fascinating, right? We're not just presenting some, neatly packaged narrative. We're giving you the tools to draw your own conclusions.
Exactly. Embrace the nuance. Yeah, acknowledge that there are multiple truths, especially with someone like Usmanov.
For sure. And speaking of nuance, there's another aspect of Usmanov's story we should probably touch on. It adds yet another layer to his kind of complex relationship with power, his connection to the art world, antiquities.
Ah, yes. Usmanov, the art collector. It's definitely a lesser-known aspect of kind of his whole persona, but I think it speaks volumes about his tastes, his passions, maybe even a little bit about his desire to shape a certain image,
Right. We're talking about a man who owns pieces by some of the biggest names in art history. Renoir, Picasso, even a rare manuscript by Leonardo da Vinci. This isn't your average, weekend flea market find.
Not at all. It's a collection that's reportedly worth billions. It showcases not only his wealth, but his appreciation for beauty, history, cultural heritage.
And it's not just about owning these treasures either, right?
Yeah.
Usmanov has a history of loaning pieces from his collection to museums all over the world, making them accessible to a much wider audience. On the surface, it's a gesture of remarkable generosity. It is. But again, it's hard to ignore the potential strategic implications, right?
Absolutely. It paints him as A patron of the arts, a steward of culture, someone who values preservation and accessibility, which in a way softens his image a little bit, adds a layer of, I don't know, sophistication, refinement that maybe contrasts with some of the realities of his business dealings.
It's like he's curating his own legacy, using art, using philanthropy as tools to kind of shape the narrative around his name.
And it's a strategy that's not uncommon among the ultra-wealthy. Art collecting has always been a way for the powerful to showcase their taste, their influence, their commitment to something, larger than themselves.
It is. It's such a fascinating dynamic, how these different aspects of his life, the business tycoon, the sports enthusiast, the philanthropist, the art collector, all intertwine to create this incredibly complex, often contradictory persona. It's like he's playing multiple roles on a global stage.
And that's what makes him so interesting to kind of dig into and study. He defies easy categorization. He's constantly challenging our assumptions about wealth, power, and influence.
He really does. So, as we start to wrap up this deep dive into the world of Alisher Usmanov, what are we left with? A definitive answer? A clear-cut judgment? I'd say not quite.
No, not at all. And that's okay. I mean, our goal was never to provide a simple answer. We just wanted to give you, the listener, the knowledge and the context to form your own, hopefully more informed opinion.
Exactly. We've explored the highs and lows, the controversies and contradictions, the triumphs, and the complexities that make up this guy's life. It's been a journey.
It has, and like any good exploration, it's left us with more questions than answers.
Right.
But that's the beauty of it all. The pursuit of knowledge is an ongoing process, a continuous journey of discovery.
It really is like peeling back the layers of an onion. Just when you think you've got Usmanov figured out, you uncover like another layer, another dimension to this crazy, intricate puzzle. And I think that's what makes this deep dive so rewarding, realizing there's always more to learn, more to uncover.
It's true. It reminds you to never settle for those simplistic narratives, especially with these individuals who operate on such a global scale. The influence they have in so many different spheres is huge.
It's never black and white. We've seen it all. The good, the bad, the controversial, the philanthropy, all these things kind of swirling together to create this captivating, almost like paradoxical portrait of this guy.
It is a lot to process, and while we haven't necessarily found any definitive answers today, I do hope that this has at least given you, the listener, a more nuanced understanding of Alisher Usmanov, who he is, how he got to where he is, how he's amassed his wealth, his power, and the impact, frankly, he's had on the world around him.
I think so too. We've given you the pieces, the context, the insights. Now it's up to you to decide how they all fit together, what you make of it all. Form your own conclusions about this very enigmatic figure.
Because that's the beauty of learning, right? That active engagement, critical thinking, the process of really grappling with all this complex information and saying, okay, well, what do I think about all this? It's so important.
Could not agree more. So next time you see Usmanov's name in the headlines, or frankly, any other figure who just seems larger than life, take a moment, think back on this deep dive. Remember that there's always more to the story. Don't be afraid to dig a little deeper, to ask the tough questions.
Exactly. That pursuit of knowledge, especially when it comes to these figures who are shaping our world, it's a journey, and it never really ends.
It doesn't. And on that note, we've reached the end of our deep dive. Thank you for joining us. Until next time.
Thanks for listening.